Hi, Mom. Hello. Yay. Okay, so remember, we ended with soldiers stepped forward, guns in their hands. It is our information that this convoy is carrying armed members of the Haganah as guards. Step out, please. Everybody step out. I must protest, snapped Moshe. Arab territory is hardly the place for unarmed Jewish civilians to climb out of an armored transport. Maybe not, mate, growled a portly sergeant, but them's our orders. Ladies first. He extended a hand and helped the heavy-step woman out first. Then the thin woman, frightened like a girl, and you too, he pointed at Ellie, who stood and inched her way through the tangle of legs to the back of the vehicle. She jumped down, feeling unwilling to accept the help of this intruder, her eyes with interest taking in her casual dress and field boots. Going camping, are you, miss? He sneered. We'll start with you then. Get your hands on the truck. Angrily, Ellie turned and placed her hands on the side of the vehicle. She closed her eyes and gritted her teeth as the leering soldier frisked her. A wave of disgust and humiliation passed over her as the man ran his hands over her. Hey, get out! Gosh, Mom, I can't read. They're too loud. Okay, so he's frisking her, and his hands, where is it? Ran over much too slowly for the purpose. That's enough, she demanded, whirling around and looking straight into his smirking face. Got any luggage? And are your bags out here, mates? He called as Ellie's camera bag and duffel bag were passed out to the waiting soldiers. The sergeant pawed through her clothes and then unzipped the camera bag. A tourist, are you, miss? Hardly the place to be taking pictures. I'm a journalist. Life magazine. You heard of it? He blanched and zipped her bag back up and handed it back to her. American, I take. Just following orders. Weapons check. He seemed eager to explain. We can't have Jews carrying weapons about the country no more than Arabs, can we now? Carries a death sentence, you know, carrying a weapon. He sniffed and grinned obnoxiously. Now you can get in, ma'am. No thanks. Ellie's eyes narrowed with contorted anger as she remembered the Arabs and their rifles back up the road just 20 minutes. I think I'll watch. The old woman was quickly frisked, did not utter a word of protest. The thin woman grew paler by the minute and hesitantly complied with the order. Ellie thought she detected tears welling up behind the woman's thick glasses as she turned and placed her hands on the truck. The sergeant quickly ran her hands over her and then shouted, "Aha!" as he touched just above her knee. Let's have it, darling, he said triumphantly, extending his hand. The woman raised her skirt and pulled a loaded revolver from a leather strap on her thigh. She raised her eyes defiantly. You don't expect us to travel these roads without protection, do you? Not after what's been happening. I don't expect anything, he snarled. I'm just doing a job. He handed the gun to a cocky private and led her by the arm to a waiting car. Ellie pulled out her camera and began snapping pictures as the men filed out of the transport one by one to be searched. I wouldn't do that, the sergeant snarled at her. And who's going to say I can't? Ellie focused on the thin girl in the British cart and snapped the shutter. The sergeant backed off and chewed his lip, and then he rubbed his hand over his cheek. I told you, I'm just doing as I'm ordered. Then he looked the group of travelers over. You can get back in now, and that goes for you too, he said to Ellie. When the heavy-set woman stepped forward and asked with dignity, "Where are you taking the girl?" Latrine headquarters, he answered curtly. Now get in. No, said the heavy-set woman. I shall go with you to your headquarters. This is Arab territory. We shall see what your superiors have to say about this. Then she turned solemnly to Ellie. Would you like to photograph our arrest? She smiled and climbed into the British car as Ellie snapped several more pictures. Suit yourself, said the sergeant, slamming the door. "You're with her. She had an illegal weapon. Then I ought to arrest the whole lot of you." Ellie snapped his picture, then smiled a bit too brightly at his initial expression before she waved at the woman and the thin girl and got into the transport. The doors clanged shut behind her as she took her seat, still furious over the search. Each of the men patted her back as she passed them, chorused congratulations. "What will happen to the women?" she asked in dismay. "Don't worry," Moshe said knowingly. "They'll make it to Tel Aviv." "How do you know they're being taken to Latran?" I don't know how to say that word. "Didn't you recognize the lady who went with the girl?" "No. But you just shot a roll of film covering the arrest of Golda Meir, Ben-Gurion's right-hand man at the Jewish agency. That ought to make a cover story," he laughed. "I'd hate to see what they do to the sergeant when she pulls out her paper." "What about the girl with the gun?" The transport lurched forward at that moment. "Golda will not leave her alone, and the British are usually pretty proper when it comes to women. That's why there are women guards on our convoy. A Jewish man caught with a weapon, even for defense, would be hanged." Ellie nodded, still enraged at the unfairness of the policy. "That was Golda Meir?" she asked, hardly able to believe that such a high-ranking member of the Jewish agency would put her life on the line so readily. She seemed so like a nice Jewish grandmother. "Uh-huh. And so she is. Jewish grandmothers like her have helped our people survive for 2,000 years. He grinned. "I can see why." Ellie shook her head in amazement. The occupants of the transport began to sing once again as they passed through Latran and Sarafand. It seemed to Ellie that they bellowed even louder as they drove along the outskirts of the British military base. They sang a tune that was called Hatikva, or The Hope. Though Ellie could not understand the words, she felt them in the voices of her companions. Let me see. Okay. There was only one hope they all lived for a homeland. When at last they arrived at Tel Aviv bus terminal, Ellie had learned most of the words of The Hope and was harmonizing with her clear alto voice as Moshe sang bass and the little man joined in with Sabra to sing the melody in tenor. "I just like singing in the shower," Ellie smiled. "Sounds terrific." "Maybe we should sing on Broadway in South Pacific, eh?" grinned the little man with an accent decidedly that of a New Yorker. "Maybe you should just make your homeland in the South Pacific somewhere. It would sure be easier than this." Ellie grabbed her belongings as Sabra opened the doors and the interior flooded with light. "I always thought Tahiti would be a nice place for a yeshiva school." Moshe jumped out and extended a hand to help her down. "As long as it was for Hasidims," the little man followed. "So when the yeshiva boys saw girls in grass skirts, they could say, 'Ha! See dem!'" Everyone groaned, and Sabra tapped his finger to his temple and shook his head. "You're a meshuggah, Arazi, a crazy man. I don't know if I'm saying any of these words right." "That's why I'm here with you, right?" Moshe whispered loudly into Ellie's ear. "An old joke." "After 4,000 years, how many new Jewish jokes can there be?" The little man scoffed and punched Moshe on the arm. Then he extended his hand. "Good luck to both of you, Mazel Tov." And he winked at Ellie. "I'll buy a copy of your magazine." He turned and followed Sabra out across the lobby of the bus station. Ellie watched their retreating forms and then gazed up at Moshe. "Crazy people living in this thing." She shook her head. "It helps to have something of a lunatic. It could get a little depressing otherwise." He put his arms around her shoulder. "And now you will meet the biggest sugar crazy person in Palestine." And he led her out onto the street, scanning the bustling, frantic traffic until he spotted a battered, rattling black hulk of an automobile weaving wildly through the other cars, and it screeched to a halt at the curb. Ehud. The ship's captain, Mom. Ehud climbed out the window, and all the other cars screeched. All the other cars screeched to a halt at the curb. Ehud then climbed out the window of the driver's side, shouting curses at another car that passed and then turned a corner. "Maniac!" he yelled, shaking his hairy fist, and he stuck out his lower lip and seemed to growl. Then, glaring at the last spot he had seen the car, he stomped toward Moshe and Ellie, muttering, "Must have worked for the Fuhrer." "This," Moshe said sheepishly, "will be your host." Ehud shift. Ehud saw Ellie standing next to Moshe and instantly changed his demeanor. Ah! His eyes lit up. He took her hand and bent to kiss it. "You're the Miss Ellie Warren we have heard so much about. Ah, yes, Moshe, she is beautiful, beautiful indeed, as you have often said." Laughing, Ellie shook his meaty hand and said, "Well, Moshe has not even told me about you until now." Then she looked wonderingly at Moshe. "Are we riding with Ehud?" "I'm afraid so," he said with mock seriousness. "Ah, that," and he gestured towards the now vanished empty automobile. "That is the car you saw? It refused to move when I wanted to change lanes," he explained. "Ehud thinks the highways are like the seas." Moshe took Ellie's bags and threw them through the window of Ehud's car. "That is why the doors of the automobile will not open. They are crushed shut. I shall drive, Ehud. This lady is much too important to me to lose her on the streets of Tel Aviv." "Oh," Ehud pouted for a brief instant and then tugged his beard thoughtfully and climbed into the car through the window. "As you wish, Moshe. So get in already. My darling waits for us at the waterfront." Ellie climbed in awkwardly after him and sat wedged between his massive frame and the door of the car as Moshe pulled into traffic. "Are you all set?" Moshe asked. "Oh, yes, I am. But my darling Maria, my love, she is not feeling well." "What seems to be the matter?" Concern was etched on Moshe's face. "Well, she's simply at that age, you know, and I fear I shall have to some day get rid of her." Ellie tried not to register shock. She leaned forward to see what Moshe's expression was as Ehud spoke about his beloved and her potential demise. To her dismay, Moshe did not seem to think that there was anything unusual about Ehud's conversation. "Has anyone checked her?" she asked, trying to be helpful. "Oh, to be sure," Ehud nodded solemnly. "But he was such a greasy fellow, lacked the sensitivity a lady requires, so I myself have taken care of her. An occasional kick in the right place when she becomes contrary." "Don't you think you should call someone in more qualified?" Ellie asked as they rounded a corner and pulled up to the docks. "I have been her master for 25 years, Ehud exclaimed. "Sweet Maria would have no one but me, who could know her half as well." "But you just can't get rid of her," protested Ellie. "Not after 25 years?" Moshe began to chuckle. He set the brake and then climbed out onto the wood plank dock. "Ah, there you see her. Is she not a vision?" He had pointed out the window of the car as he waited for Ellie to climb out. Ellie searched the waterfront and saw no one but two old fishermen scraping barnacles off of a dry dock hulk, and another young man mending nets on an old trawler. "Where?" Moshe poked his head out the passenger window. "Do you need help getting out?" he asked Ellie. She rolled her eyes and made a face at him as if to say, "Which asylum has Ehud escaped from?" "Where is Maria?" she said. "I don't see any female out there," she said to Moshe as Ehud climbed out of the driver's side. I suppose it depends on one's perspective." He pointed to the ancient weather-scarred trawler below and said, "I suppose, well, this is Ehud's